Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to IRG Start or Sit podcast. This is our podcast where we talk about the previous week's NFL injuries. This week, we're talking about last week, which was week 13, going into week 14 here this coming weekend. And what player was injured? Are they still injured? Maybe they're injured in week 12. We're talking, and we do talk to this wonderful gentleman on the line with us right now, Dr. Chris Hawkins, orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist from Washington Orthopaedics down in Olympia, Washington. How you doing, Dr. Hawkins?
I'm doing wonderful, Shannon. Coming back from that extended weekend with football going on for like 4 or 5 days. It felt like a special time of year when we have Thanksgiving roll around.
Yeah, we get to watch football over Thanksgiving, and now we get to talk about football on our Starter Sit podcast. And our first athlete up, I think he just recently had the longest run for a quarterback or something like that. I don't know. Taysom Hill, New Orleans Saints, tight end quarterback. This guy is a multi-versatile player, so to speak. Unfortunately, last week he tore his ACL, and he is done for the season. We're talking about going into week 14. There's, 16, 17 weeks in the NFL season. Tore his ACL. He is pretty much done. Check.
Yeah, it's a sad situation. He's always shown the ability to really play really above his level. He's such, like you said, multi-talented. But with these ACL injuries, as we've seen them happen before, that's critically important for stability of his knee. He is a runner in addition to a little bit of passing. He catches, he does everything. Yeah. And so, and he's 34 years old, and that's the thing that's snuck up on a lot of people. So the tough part for Taysom is this could be a, sort of a career decline injury for him. I'm sure he'll go through and do a good rehab process, but, we're talking next year he'll be 35.
Wow, yeah.
And that's kind of approaching the end of your career as a tight end or a multi-use athlete in the NFL.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere just the other day that the career lifespan for a running back or anybody that's touching the ball and getting hit frequently like a tight end or a quarterback like Taysom Hill or just a running back, I think it's like 3 to 4 years. That's their lifespan just from a physical punishment they take. He's going to be 35, but you think he might be back. Let's talk about the ACL rehab because I want to kind of touch on this. He is 34. He'll be 35 next week, next season. Right now in today's world with the technology and kind of some of the innovations that have occurred with surgical approaches, minimally invasive scopes, certain grafts, et cetera, with the ACL. When I started in physical therapy, if you had an ACL tear, you had a long leg cast on, you had a Macintosh procedure, and you were in a cast. It was a 14-month return to play, almost a year and a half. Tell us about today's world of ACL discovery.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the goal has always been trying to make things more anatomic. When you bring up that Macintosh procedure, that gave stability to the joint, but it didn't do it in an anatomic way. Mm-hmm. So, the recovery was slow, and generally you were accelerated with regards to like arthritic issues in the knee. So nowadays, at 34, 35, if he wasn't an NFL player, I would just tell a guy like that, you're going to get back to everything you did before you hurt yourself. The goal for him is just, can he recover all of that quickness, that balance, that all of those things that are a little harder to recover as you get a bit older. I'm fond of telling patients that, I don't really feel bad or judge athletes that sometimes get caught with performance-enhancing drug use after a major injury when they know they have such a small window of time and they're doing it as part of their rehab process rather than just like, I'm a healthy person and I'm doing steroids to get bigger and stronger.
Yeah.
He's the kind of situation where you really sort of say, okay, we know with technology, he can have a great result. He can have a good recovery with all the physical therapy advances that have been made. But it's just a question of, will his body be able to recover everything the same as before? And he's a skill position guy. So those guys, again, much harder for them to come back after this level of an injury over the age of 30, 32.
Yeah, but you're exactly right. I mean, good point. I think about 10, 15 years ago, I think if an athlete had an ACL injury, the common theme was, they're going to lose a step. They're going to lose a step. However, with today's technology and the rehab and just just how these athletes are in such great shape even prior to having surgery, which is prehab is the new rehab, as we know. But your guy, Saquon Barkley, he had an ACL tear 2 years ago. The guy's probably going to be the MVP of the league this year, running for the flying. Come on, help me out here. The Eagles.
Let's go.
There you go.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, again, I just wanted to kind of emphasize the technology. Hey, Dr. Hawkins, real quick. I know it's a surgeon's preference, but with these ACLs today, based on what you're doing, are you doing predominantly this patella tendon, and there's this quad tendon is using the quad tendon is kind of catching on. What's the preference out there, do you think?
Well, the idea behind it is obviously you want something that's as strong as possible and that you can also fix well inside the knee joint itself. So really all the graft options out there, most of those things have been developed to a point that they all work well. Now it's just a matter of sort of seeing what's the downside of taking a graft from another area. And so that's probably the most important thing that differentiates the quadriceps tendon, where you're taking the tendon above the kneecap, versus the patellar tendon down below. So the designs with the quadriceps tendon use, you don't take off a piece of bone. Yep. And so less risk of they're rare, but less risk of like patella fracture. Mm-hmm. We've talked in the past, Jerry Rice, actually, when he had his ACL done, it was a patellar tendon, and he fell on it and actually fractured his kneecap afterwards. Yeah. And so those are those things that with the use of the quadriceps tendon, you get the strength of the patellar tendon, but maybe not the downside, the morbidity associated with taking bone plugs. So that seems to be the importance of it. But again, it's so interesting to kind of see that there's always a swing with these things. You really have to kind of look, okay, what's that short-term recovery? But then where are you in 5 years? Where are you in 7? And some things that we thought were going to be outstanding, we realized, well, you know what, at 10 years, they don't do as well as that old way we did.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's what we're trying to kind of figure out constantly. Yeah. And it's all repetition too. It's what people do a lot of and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, gosh, good stuff. Thank you for that update. Here's a guy that I kind of feel sorry for. Well, not kind. I do feel sorry for him. Christian McCaffery. I mean, we've talked about Christian with bilateral Achilles tendonitis. This gentleman, obviously super important to the 49ers. 49ers are 5-7. They still have maybe an opportunity to get a playoff. I think they might be in a wild card. They go into Buffalo. And it's snowing in Buffalo. I'm excited to see this game. Christian McCaffery has been back for a week or two. Again, he was out since training camp, and I think he missed the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. He comes back whenever it was. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it doesn't seem like. And here he is. He's running, and he just stops. You can see, what happened? And to come to find out, everybody just, I think, assumed he had exacerbated his Achilles tendonitis. He tore his PCL. And if you watch it in a slow motion, I wanted to ask you, his calf actually buckles or bulges. It's a fairly interesting phenomenon from an anatomical standpoint. Let's talk about the PCL.
Yeah, so the PCL is that sort of forgotten ligament in the knee a lot of times, and it's not injured as commonly because it's a much bigger ligament. And sort of the classic mechanism is that sort of dashboard injury, hitting your knee up against the dashboard in a car accident, or falling hard on the front of your knee. So it's really, really unusual to have a non-contact PCL injury. We hear about non-contact ACL injuries all the time. So it becomes one of those things where you think, hey, this might be a situation where he's had a mild PCL sprain at some point earlier in his career or life. And those heal, and they are very stable. But perhaps that PCL ligament was not, full caliber, full size. And therefore, with one of his motions on that slick field, decelerating, the force of his body moving forward, his foot not moving at the same time, and then the imbalance that goes hand in hand with all that time away from playing with his Achilles issues, I think it's sort of like that mixture of things that led to this injury. But, as we saw this year with Puka Nacua, who had a PCL sprain, this is usually minimum 6 weeks to rest it, let things recover. And so, it's going to end his season unless somehow they get super lucky and sneak into the playoffs. And I appreciate your honesty that you kind of feel bad, but don't feel bad as a Seahawks fan, because with him out, I think it keeps things much more open for Gino and the guys to get in.
Yeah, again, I go back to this 3 to 5 year window that these running backs have as far as a career span. This guy is pretty impressive. He's a hard worker. He runs hard. Here he is. I mean, this season's just not been his season. I don't know. What has he played? Maybe 3 games? Like I said, between being hurt in training camp, having bilateral Achilles tendonitis. I don't know. You've treated plenty of Achilles tendonitis patients. I certainly have. That is not a fun injury, nor is it an easy injury to recover from. He comes back, and then he has an injury. This is a non-contact injury. He was doing a jet sweep, and he just stopped. I mean, I'm sure he felt a pop or he felt something go on, but he just literally went down. And then to find out, mechanically, it didn't look like a PCL injury. It looked like something was going on with it. I thought it was an Achilles tendon rupture. That's what I thought it was. But you're not going to fix this. This PCL does not need to be fixed. He's going to recover, but he's probably on the IR right now, so he's done for the season. Look for him next year. That's Christian McCaffery. Fair to say there?
Absolutely. Yep.
Nice. Here's another one that I kind of like to watch. I saw him play probably a couple games ago. Here we are, like I said, going into week 14. We're talking about week 13 injuries. This is IRG Starter Sit podcast. J.K. Dobbins. I like this guy. I like this running back. He's got a sprained MCL. It sounds like he sprained it. Oh, man, this was a game that the Ravens and San Diego were going at it. Pretty good game. And then all of a sudden, J.K. Dobbins disappeared. He's pretty important for them from a running back standpoint, and he's gone. He's off the bench. And I think the announcers even on the TV said, well, we think he went to the locker room. We'll come to find out. If he's on IR, tell us what's going on with his MCL to have him go on IR.
Yeah, that's tells us right away he's got a grade 2 injury. Grade 2 is, where you've got laxity on examination. So if you stress the knee, the MCL's on that inside part, as you know. When you stress the knee with an extension, it feels pretty stable. But if you bend the knee about 30 degrees and stress it, you get some laxity there. So that means there's been partial loss of the attachment of the MCL to the bone. And so that's got to heal as an extra articular ligament outside the lining of the knee joint. As long as you protect it, that usually heals relatively uneventfully, but generally minimum 4 to 6 weeks. And that's the reason behind the IR placement with something like that. Yeah,
this is we'll talk later about DK Metcalf, but this is DK Metcalf, I believe, earlier in the season. He had a sprained MCL, and I think he missed 2 games, 2 consecutive weeks. I think he came back, but I think he has something else going on. We'll chat about a little while. Bucky Irving, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, running back. This guy's got a couple things going on, and mostly it's his hip. It sounds like it's a hip and back area. He was limping during the game. He looked like he had been hurt. Bucky Irving, former Oregon Duck, playing for the Buccaneers, a good running back, very skilled, gifted, but he did not practice. I think they're still kind of questioning whether or not he's going to participate this weekend. You have any insight there?
Yeah, we do have a little insight. Sometimes these did not play are a bad sign, and sometimes they're very precautionary. And it looks as though his was just very precautionary. He's kind of had some of the inside reporters that follow the Buccaneers have said that they're just keeping him out to avoid aggravating this issue. They do think he's going to be a play for this weekend. So for those people who are kind of watching the Buccaneers and excited about him because they lost Godwin a little bit earlier this year, and they need their skill players to be performing well to make it. The good news is it looks like Bucky Irving, even though he did not practice today, that he will be a game time play.
Bucky Irving, game time this week. I believe they play, if my schedule's right here, it looks like the Buccaneers at 6-6 go up against the Raiders at 2-10, and Bucky is going to play, okay? Speaking of which, just real quick as we get to this next athlete, funny is, I think you and I think we talked about Josh Allen early in the season, and he had something going on. It might have been a hand or something like that if I remember right. But Josh Allen had a running, a passing, and I think a reception the other night in the Buffalo win. And Chris Collinsworth, who was calling the game with Mike Tirico, he said, "That's good. I've got Josh Allen's on my fantasy football team." So he did very well that night. Yep. Did you have him on your team, Doc?
No, I don't. But that's a unique way to stack up points.
Yeah,
he got. They tried to almost do. It was almost like in baseball when you have the complicated scoring plays. I think people had to pull out the rule books to figure out how many points he got for the sequence of events.
Yeah, I know. It was that's pretty cool. That was a great play, by the way. CeeDee Lamb, this guy. I think he. If I remember right, he suffered beginning in November. He had an AC joint separation. We've talked about the acromioclavicular joint here, and the separation happens a lot in football. We see it a lot in quarterbacks. We see it a lot in hockey players getting checked in the board. And this guy's kind of been experiencing this a little bit. And I'm just wondering, with Dallas at 5-7 and playing the Bengals at 4-8, what do you think? What do you think CeeDee Lamb's going to be doing this weekend?
I think he's still going to play. I mean, it is that time of year that we wonder whether teams will start to throttle back some of their mid-level injuries to try to rest guys, not have them aggravated and stuff like that. But I think he's been showing good progressions. They've been allowing him to play, and it doesn't seem like he's aggravated it. So I think he'll be a play this week, and I think they've been minimizing his contact stuff during the week just to avoid aggravating it. But if you've got him on your team, he's pretty reliable. Even with Cooper Rush as quarterback now, he's been still a primary target of his.
Well, the last game I saw them play, and I don't recall what I watched a little bit, I thought they looked pretty good. I thought the Cowboys were actually looking pretty good. So they might have some possibilities there, right? You ever sprained your AC joint? Have you ever done anything to your AC joint, Doc?
I have not. But my estimation of it with all the people that come in is it's pretty uncomfortable.
Oh man, I had a grade 2. Fell on the lateral side, just kind of irritated it and popped it. And I have a piano step off. I've got the cardinal sign of an AC joint on my left side. It took, I guarantee it took 14 months before I could finally lay on it without being painful. And I don't understand how a football player can go out and play with an AC joint that's even partly irritated and get a contact from the lateral side or fall on that shoulder. Man, I mean, it's painful. It is painful. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Last player for the podcast here. It's a big one, though. It's a big one. We're talking about the Seahawks, our own Seattle Seahawks. Man, and they're coming alive. I think they're a second half team here. Second half of the season, 7-5. Big game, divisional game, Doc. Cardinals 6-6. Okay. I watched him play the Jets, obviously last Sunday, and there was something happened, and then he ended up, I don't know, something happened. He went to the sidelines. He might have gone in the blue tent, so to speak. And then he came out again, and he played. But now they're talking about he's got a knee and a shoulder. We talked about his knee MCL sprain that he had a couple of weeks ago. And then what do you think is going on here?
Well, I think we've kind of established on that timeline of missing a couple games for the knee that he probably had a grade 1 sprain. Mm-hmm. The bad news is those tend to be sore and stiff for a long time. And so that's kind of hobbled him up. And most people will say he hasn't been quite as mobile, quite as productive. They've really, Jackson Smith and Jigba has been taking more of the looks from Geno. And then this shoulder injury, I think it dovetails into that CeeDee Lamb thing where he took a hit. I don't think he hit the ground. I think he just got hit from the side, and that's been irritated as well. So probably sort of a grade 1 AC injury as well. And so, you got that kind of guy who's a bit banged up. He's been a bit of hasn't missed time. He's been a stud for so long. And I think he's going to, divisional game, I think you're going to rely on him playing right now. One thing I'd ask you as a Seahawks fan is, are you happy with, the Seahawks winning with great defense and mediocre offense? Because that seems to be their winning, thing right now. Yeah, and I think
there was a famous coach that he might have been from the East Coast, and he might have even coached somewhere when you were growing up, and I forget who he was, but he was a well-known coach, and he used to say, "Defense wins championships." Okay. And so if you
might have been Buddy Ryan.
Yeah. I was just going to say, way to jump in there. Thank you. That's exactly, yeah. So we're happy with that. We're just happy to be 7-5. There was a time there 3 weeks ago when I thought the Seahawks, oh boy, this is going to be a long season. New coach. They were talking about in the media, you got to give the coach a year. I mean, I think they're looking actually pretty good. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Everything starts, in football as it is, everything starts with the O-line, in my opinion. When you look at offense, you have to be able to run the ball, and then it opens the pass. And here we are coaching. We're clinicians, and now we're all of a sudden armchair coaches, right? Don't you like that? But we're happy with the Seahawks. I mean, you're happy with the Eagles. So, I got to tell you, my friend, the Eagles look good. The Eagles look really good.
And that's what every Eagles fan doesn't want to hear.
Yeah.
Every one of them says, "Don't talk about us. Yeah. We're not that good."
Exactly. I didn't say the Phillies. I said, I'm just kidding. No, but you know what? It's interesting. I read something where I think one of the reasons they were talking, and I don't know what newspaper it was, but DK Metcalf went out during the Seahawks game. And he came back in. I mean, they said, oh, no, DK's going out. What's going on, And he came back in. But what happened, it sounded like he had taken a hit to the knee. And I can only assume it was out on the lateral side somewhere. And it sounds like that hit caused a brief contusion, a little neuropathy or a little nerve insult there, and his foot went numb. I mean, that hit to because you have that fibular nerve. I would imagine, I don't know, anatomically, you got that nerve that's pretty superficial on the fibular head, lateral side, outside of your knee. Did you hear that at all?
Yeah. You're talking about that common peroneal nerve, and it wraps around, just below the fibular head.
Yep.
And it is very superficial. Some people will actually just get entrapment of that nerve just from muscle contractions and stuff like that. But it's just like hitting your funny bone,
exactly,
ulnar nerve at your elbow. But instead of your little finger going numb, you go numb down into your foot.
Yeah.
So I think that had him a little concerned at first, and then they sort of probably took him in the tent, tested his ligaments, tapped on that nerve, and he's like, oh, yeah, that makes my foot tingle. And they're like, okay, you're all right. You can go back out.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us on IRG's Start or Sit podcast. Once again, Dr. Hawkins, enjoyed our conversation. You do such a great job explaining the injury and whether or not that player is going to be able to come back or not. So far this year, I'm looking back at some of the conversation. You're pretty good. You're more than pretty good. You're really good. You've identified who's going to start, who's going to sit, and good luck this weekend going into week 14. And join us next week for IRG Starter Sit Fantasy Football Podcast. Dr. Hawkins, take care. Have a good night. Fly, Eagles, fly.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Shannon. Go Seahawks.
Okay.